She's weathered a lot of storms in her 2.5 years as Prime Minister. So what about this one? Four cabinet ministers slamming the door and counting as Theresa May once again faced the music with the long-awaited unveiling of a draft Brexit deal to a hostile parliament. Add to that the previous day's grilling and the selling of that 585-page divorce deal tome to a divided cabinet. Hard Brexit Tory backbenchers are in battle formation behind Member of Parliament Jacob Rees-Moog, who's trying to mount the needed support to topple May immediately. To think that the real day of judgment still lies ahead. That's the one where Westminster ratifies or rejects the agreement. The fresh political turmoil has put pressure on the pound, and with both the ruling Conservatives and the opposition Labour Party bitterly divided amongst themselves, the rest of the continent's left wondering, can they sort it all out in Britain in time? All the talk of palace coups and snap elections taking place a little over 4 months before the United Kingdom is officially scheduled to leave the European Union. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the Brexit revolt taking place inside the Conservatives. Joining us from London, Chloe Wesley, columnist for Conservative Home. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
French Socialist Senator Hélène Conway-Mouret represents the French abroad. I should say Vice President of the Senate now. Thank you for being with us again.
Yep.
And France 24 Europe editor Catherine Nicholson is with us as well. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. We knew sparks would fly at this point, and they have. The ideological battle over that 2016 referendum once again playing out for all to see.
Voting against a deal would take us all back to square one. It would mean more uncertainty, more division, and a failure to deliver on the decision of the British people that we should leave the EU. If we get behind a deal, we can bring our country back together and seize the opportunities that lie ahead. Choice is clear. We can choose to leave with no deal, we can risk no Brexit at all, or we can choose or we can choose to unite and support the best deal that can be negotiated.
Later, when she spoke at Downing Street, Chloe Wesley, Theresa May saying the British people just want us to get on with it. Do you agree with that?
Well, I agree they want her to get on with Brexit, but this deal that she has proposed and the EU have said that they also would be open to is really just associated membership of the EU. That's why there are so many resignations today. Brexiteer MPs and ministers are saying this isn't really a clean break from the EU. We're not taking back control of decision-making powers on laws and regulations. Would be tied to the customs union, and there's a never-ending transition period. There isn't an end date to the transition period, which means the UK could just be tied to EU membership for an indefinite period. So that is, to me, quite unacceptable. And I would have thought that the British negotiators could have come up with something much better than this. And whilst she does seem very calm in her speech this evening, there are lots of talk and speculation about further ministers resigning, and we may see a leadership election very soon about a future Prime Minister of the Conservative Party of Great Britain who actually is a Brexiteer, who does believe in it, who would go back to the EU or potentially commit to Britain leaving the EU without a trade agreement.
Isn't it a bit late in the day, though? Again, we're looking at March the 29th as the day for divorce.
That is one of the considerations, and that is what she's relying on in cabinet. She told her cabinet ministers, look, it's very late in the day. We either accept this deal or we don't leave the EU, or we leave without a deal. I think at this point, the most favourable outcome would be to leave initially without an agreement and then negotiate an agreement later on in the day. I certainly don't think that signing Britain up to a never-ending membership of the EU will be satisfactory to voters, especially when you think about the rise of populism in Europe, of far-right extremism. I would think that politicians would be very scared and hesitant of disregarding voters' concerns, because there are a lot of people that voted for Brexit that were concerned that the political process didn't have space for them, that it wasn't working for them, that politicians didn't have any regard for their views. And if there is a second referendum, or if Brexit isn't delivered, then a lot of people will be asking themselves, hang on, what is this system? Why have they ignored my vote? Why do I pay my taxes
you're saying
into
that
this system?
Because what you're suggesting, if she is toppled, and again, time is running out, there's a high likelihood that there will be no deal. You prefer no deal to the deal that's at hand?
Absolutely. This agreement is a terrible agreement. And there's no going back on it. If Britain signs up to this agreement, it will be stuck in this transition period, in this arrangement. And there's a clause in this agreement which is very concerning, which would mean that if the UK in the future wanted to leave the EU's customs union, it would have to have the written permission of the EU. That is just preposterous. I don't understand how any negotiator could have accepted that. I'm really, really disappointed. And I do hope that either the policy changes or the leader changes very soon.
Catherine Nicholson.
Well, that's talking about the backstop there. And we need to be very careful when we talk about this not to confuse the withdrawal agreement and the future trading relationship. The withdrawal agreement is the sort of legally binding text that's being pulled together at the moment. And there was 7 pages about the future arrangements. When we're talking about a customs union, that's the backstop arrangement for avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland. So essentially, in the withdrawal agreement, the UK leaves on the 29th of March and goes into a transition period where essentially nothing changes, and only if there is no solution for the Irish border question by July 2020 does that customs union situation come into effect as a backstop, potentially.
You just heard Chloe Wesley say she prefers no deal to the deal that's at hand. Do a majority of Britons agree?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it, Francois? I mean, there is polling on this. YouGov have brought out a poll about 2 hours ago where they say that around 42% of the British public oppose the draft deal that Theresa May has agreed with the EU at this point. Only 19% support it, but quite crucially, 39% of people that YouGov asked said they simply don't know. So it's still an extremely mixed picture, a lot of confusion among the British public. And I think perhaps this does reflect the fact that it is a fact that on the referendum ballot paper in 2016, there were 2 options: remain in the EU or leave the EU. But that leave option did not say specifically leave this, that, something else, single market, customs union. That was not clear on that ballot paper.
Time running short, and the backbenchers making their move. They have pull in Parliament, in particular, thanks to rules that allow a leadership challenge from within the Conservative Party. Catherine Viette explains.
It takes just 15% of Conservative MPs to trigger a leadership challenge. It's done by writing letters to the chairman of the party's 1922 committee demanding a confidence vote. Currently, the Conservative Party holds 315 seats, so 48 MPs would need to write such a letter. Once the challenge is triggered, all Conservative MPs are eligible to vote for or against their leader, and the vote can be organized as soon as possible, with the date decided by the 1922 committee chairman and the party leader. If Theresa May wins, she stays in office and cannot be challenged again for another 12 months. If May loses, she must resign, and she's not allowed to stand in the leadership election that follows. Then a race for her replacement as Prime Minister will be held. This won't automatically trigger a general election. If several people throw their hat in the ring, a secret vote will be held by Conservative MPs to narrow down the field. The candidate with the fewest votes is removed, and the process continues on Tuesdays and Thursdays until 2 candidates remain. The final 2 names will then be put to a postal ballot for the rest of the Conservative Party, who've been members for more than 3 months. And a new Prime Minister will be named.
And so you have a Conservative backbencher, Jacob Rees-Moog, a few hours ago announcing this leadership challenge and insisting that it's not a coup.
Well, it's nothing to do with ambition of Brexiteers. It is about ambition for Brexit and the country. Leaving the European Union is the most fantastic opportunity for the United Kingdom. It means we can have the opportunity of setting lower tariffs, cheaper food, clothing and footwear, helping the least well-off in our society the most. This opportunity is being thrown away. If you look at the deal, our tariffs will be set by the European Union, and it would be illegal for us to offer lower tariffs. This is not Brexit. This is a failure of government policy. It needs to be rejected. This is nothing to do with personal ambition.
Did you hear that? Hélène Conway-Mouret, a fantastic opportunity. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, maybe for those who would like to step into Mrs. May's shoes, I think. I fail to understand what's happening. We had nearly 500,000 people in the streets just a few weeks ago in London calling for a new referendum, thinking, that they did not understand fully what the implications were when they voted and would like a second chance now that, they know a bit more about what Brexit actually means. And now today we have the rise of all the hard Brexiters coming out as if there is a total shift in the country, even though the polls do not seem to indicate that. So I fail to understand exactly what's happening, except that I see that within the Conservative Party, a few members see the opportunity for their own ambitions, I think, to come true and maybe take Mrs. May's place. But I'd just like to say one thing. I was in London just a few weeks ago, and what I came back with was this impression that families were being torn apart with this Brexit debate. The Conservative Party now is, on the brink of, tearing itself apart on this issue. And I think, it's...
Same with the Labour Party, by the way.
Not as much. I mean, the Congress saw a kind of a rise from the base, from the activists who clearly stated what they wanted. And I think, the leader then, even though himself maybe doesn't share their views, went along with what came from them. But I think it is a highly divisive issue today. And what we see, to me, is a total mess.
What's the state of play with this leadership challenge, Catherine Nicholson?
In terms of how it impacts on the Brexit process itself?
Well, first of all, can they reach it? Can they get those 48 signatures that Catherine Viette was talking about in her report? And secondly, yes, how will it impact? Is that the end of the negotiations with Brussels then? Okay,
well, so taking the leadership challenge process itself, no, there are not the 48 letters at this point as I speak, although they could soon come. There have certainly been plenty of rumours that the numbers are there. Our viewers will have heard of something called the European Research Group, which is this very hard Brexit group of conservatives who are very furious, and they're all sort of coalescing around Jacob Rees-Moog as their leader. So it would appear that there really are strongly the numbers to get a leadership election forced. Several letters have gone in today, not just Jacob Rees-Mogg. In terms of how it impacts on the technical process of Brexit, I've been in touch with the European Council, and they say, no, we are still absolutely organising the November 25th summit. Several meetings will have to take place before that, and we're still keeping those wheels turning. You've got to remember that the European Commission has been negotiating the Brexit deal with the British government. So in a sense, whether it's Theresa May, who's the head of the government, or somebody else, that's not necessarily super important right now. If there is a leadership challenge, my contact at the council saying this is, of course, hypothetical, but he doesn't believe that it would even throw off the summit. So even if Theresa May was challenged.
He's saying that, but it depends who the Prime Minister of Great Britain is at that point.
Well, there's timings as well, because you can't have a leadership challenge overnight. It would be, as Jacob Rees-Mogg himself said, a matter of weeks probably to get a replacement for Theresa May. We heard about the steps there, about the different votes that would have to happen. So November 25th, it is only 10 days away. I sense that summit would come before a replacement for Theresa May.
Chloe Wesley, without delving too much into inside politics, who'd be the right man or woman to lead the UK at this critical moment?
Well, there are quite a few names being thrown around. The Brexit minister, Dominic Raab, who resigned today, is being listed as one of the potential candidates. He campaigned very strongly for Brexit. He doesn't have as much ministerial experience, though, as perhaps some people would like. Boris Johnson, of course, is always also being considered for the position. Pretty much any Brexit-supporting, high-profile Conservative MP right now is being considered. Nobody has formally said, as far as I'm aware, that they are going to run. So this is just a hypothetical, but the whispers are there's quite a few names, and I wouldn't want to make a prediction, not in this political climate.
I have a quick question, actually, for Chloe Wesley. It's Catherine Nicholson, Europe editor. Considering that the vast majority of Conservative MPs campaigned for the Remain side in the referendum, is it certain, do you think, that the party as a whole would get behind somebody who was a hard Brexiteer as the new leader of the party?
Well, I think they'd probably get behind someone who is pro-Brexit because they ran on a manifesto last year in the general election to deliver on Brexit. And a lot of Conservative MPs are concerned about the credibility of the party when they go to a general election and say, Theresa May is going to deliver this hard Brexit, we're going to formally cleanly leave the EU. And then to have a halfway deal, a lot of Conservative activists are angry. A lot of people that voted trusted the Conservative Party that weren't loyal voters are now questioning, did they lie to us? So I think there would be a majority. But as I said, it's really hard to predict these things. And I'm not that friendly with all the MPs. I'm kind of on the outside, commentating from the outside. But that would be my instinct, that they would want to support, they would want a Conservative Brexiteer leader.
Just one reaction. I think we're kind of past the pro or against Brexit.
The ship has sailed.
Yes, yes. But what I see now is Nigel Farage and his friends winning again a second time when the British people voted them out because the UKIP is gone. And
right now UKIP is not at all represented in the British Parliament.
No, absolutely not. But yet they wanted a no deal, and if we listen to you, Madame, you would like to have no deal so that you can negotiate after. But in how many years and what happens in the meantime to the thousands of people whose lives will be changed drastically because they won't know if they're entitled to continue living in Britain or if British people continue living on, in European countries. So I think we don't really have the time, 5-10 years to just have a new deal.
All right, we'll pick up on that point. I'll get Chloe's reactions to that. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're watching the chips fall in London. They have not yet finished falling, what with cabinet resignations and perhaps more to come this 48 hours after that deal on a draft agreement between the UK and the European Union on Brexit, one that Theresa May is still trying to sell while warding off a leadership challenge. Chloe Wesley joins us from London. She's columnist for Conservative Home. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Socialist French Senator Hélène Conway-Mouret, Vice President of the Senate now, and who represents the French abroad in the upper chamber of the French Parliament. Our Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson, is with us as well. When those first resignations began early this morning, markets didn't like what they were seeing. The pound punished, dropping at one point below €1.13. We've had car maker BMW saying it's continuing to prepare for a no-deal Brexit and strongly urging the government on, saying it welcomed the draft withdrawal agreement as a positive step in the right direction. Chloe Wesley, what is your reaction to the market's reaction?
Well, the markets reacted in a similar way on the day of the vote. I think markets don't react very well to uncertainty, which is why I would definitely oppose a second referendum. I think the most important thing is that we do come to a permanent agreement that both sides agree to. At the moment, the Prime Minister has proposed something which I believe is completely unacceptable. And a lot of Conservative politicians believe are unacceptable. But
you'd rather run the risk of a no deal. You'd rather run the risk of a no deal Brexit. Isn't that much more uncertainty than a second referendum?
Well, I just want to read out one of the statements from the ministers today, because a lot of this has been reported as though it's about tribalism and personalities. But here's a statement. We are a proud nation, and it is a sad day when we are reduced to obeying rules made by other countries who have shown that they do not have our best interests at heart. I think that statement from the minister that resigned today pretty much sums it up. I don't know any country who would accept the agreement that the EU have put in front of us. I just don't. It would turn Britain into a vassal state, receiving legislation and having absolutely no say in how it is written. And I really don't think politicians understand how much anger there will be if Brexit is cancelled or if this still goes through and we don't actually leave the EU.
All right, let's go to Manchester at this point and welcome Conservative member of the European Parliament, Sajjad Karim, just back from Strasbourg at the European Parliament. Thank you for being with us here on the France 24 debate.
Good evening.
Your thoughts now on where do we go from here, and your thoughts on this leadership challenge against Theresa May?
Well, I'm a little bit behind on developments because I've just literally got straight off a flight and walked into the studio here today. But of course, I'm very well aware that there's been a number of resignations throughout the course of the day, but the Prime Minister is standing her ground, certainly at this stage. What is clear, however, is that it is one particular faction of the party that is resigning from its government responsibilities, and that is those people that actually championed the Brexit cause right from the outset. They won the referendum, but today they are all abandoning their cause as it is gasping for breath.
We were doing 24 hours ago, Sajjad, the math, and the big vote, the crucial date will be when the finalized version is put before lawmakers at Westminster. How does Theresa May get the votes?
Well, the arithmetic is extremely challenging for the Prime Minister. And I don't see that situation changing in a way that the vote would be carried at the first round. However, that would then allow for some period of reflection and possible further amendments, not in terms of negotiations with the European Union, but within the United Kingdom itself. That could possibly just persuade enough people to tip the balance so that the Prime Minister can get it through on a further vote or a second vote. Failing that, of course, there are two other options, and that is the general election or potentially a further referendum putting the deal or remaining in the European Union directly to the people of the United Kingdom.
All right, and we've been talking about that. Now, Theresa May's minority government rests currently on the support of the Northern Irish Democratic Unionist Party, or rather, if you listen to what its deputy leader said in the House of Commons earlier, rested, past tense, upon it.
I could today stand here and take the Prime Minister through the list of promises and pledges that she made to this House and to us privately about the future of Northern Ireland in the future relationship with the EU. But I fear it would be a waste of time since she clearly doesn't listen.
And on the other side of that divide in Northern Ireland, a plea from moderate Republicans.
And I would make this appeal to people in Westminster. I know you have your own constituencies. I know you have your own political machinations to go through. But we have a responsibility, and I think everyone has a responsibility, to avoid a hard border in Ireland. This does that.
Chloe Wesley, what would you answer to that?
Well, this has been one of the huge issues of the negotiations. And I think if Britain were to leave without a deal, without a free trade agreement, this would be the number one bilateral agreement that would need to be prioritised. There would be a political solution. There have been several suggestions for how this issue could be dealt with, but it would rely on political goodwill. By merely saying the solution is simply to stay in the EU, I don't really think is acceptable. Lord Trimble, who negotiated the Good Friday Agreement, wrote a really, really interesting report where he proposed a technological solution to this issue. And I think that would be a framework for any no-deal scenario.
Hélène Conway-Mouret?
Well, I think there is agreement everywhere that nobody wants to see a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Now, the solutions that were proposed are not applicable, and they have been tested, and unfortunately nothing works so far. Some of them went as far as creating a border in the Irish Sea. So we see that the situation is very complex, and I am not too sure, again, that a no deal will be able to lead to the peace that we want to see in Northern Ireland in the time that it will take for the negotiation of how do we actually have all these goods and people passing a border that in effect will have to exist, because the Republic of Ireland will be a country that will remain in the EU, and Northern Ireland being part of the UK, it will mean that we will need to have controls. So everything so far that has been proposed apparently doesn't seem to be working. So there again, you know, it's the same debate that we have on everything. We have the wish to do something, and then when we come into the concrete kind of realities, it's very difficult to kind of apply it.
Sajjad Karim, what would you say right now to the leadership of the DUP?
Well, actually, the situation is as follows, that the idea that the United Kingdom and the European Union can have a Brexit without a deal is a non-starter. And I put my neck absolutely out there and say to you very clearly, I do not see any circumstances in which there will be a no-deal Brexit. There simply isn't a majority for it, either in the British House of Commons or in the European Parliament either. And they are the two parliaments that must vote on this. So that's not a situation that is going to arise. And secondly, the point that's being made by many people who supported Brexit, that if we have a no-deal Brexit, we can have many smaller mini-agreements put in place, and that the first and primary one would be a bilateral between the UK and the Republic of Ireland to help resolve this issue. They forget and misunderstand one basic fact, that when it comes to trade, it is the European Union that negotiates on behalf of all of its member states. So that would not be a bilateral between the Republic of Ireland and the UK. It would be a bilateral between the EU and the UK. So you get absolutely no further to where you are at this moment in time.
When you say that neither side will accept a no-deal solution, we're running short on time. Does that imply? Would that mean that we would push back the date when the UK leaves the EU?
Well, one of the things in the European Union that we are particularly good at, and that is being very imaginative in finding solutions to tremendously tricky problems. And if we are coming up against the clock and there is need for more time, difficult as it is, even President Tusk today indicated that that remains open, and the ability for the United Kingdom to actually remain in the European Union it remains on the table, as of course does the fact of an agreed final settlement and exit. But that's now in the hands of the British Parliament.
All right, let's look at some reactions from this side of the channel with our Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson. First, let's listen, Catherine, to the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, watching his words as he commented on the draft agreement.
Decisive progress has been made, and this paves the way for a special meeting of the European Council later this month. While I welcome these developments, let me say at the outset that Brexit is not our policy and is something that we regret. However, we respect the vote of the United Kingdom's people and their decision to leave.
Again, carefully choosing his words there, but nonetheless making that pitch for there to be a deal.
Absolutely. I mean, the Republic of Ireland, as Hélène Conway was just saying during that soundbite, is absolutely the country that's most impacted at this point. It's the country that really has probably the most to lose, really, because we're not just talking about trade, are we? We're talking about peace. We're talking about livelihoods. We're talking about people's sort of well-being. Leo Varadkar has been pretty careful throughout this whole process not to be seen to be influencing the negotiations in any way while holding that very key central role. We actually heard probably more frank talk from the French side.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah. The French Prime Minister on a visit to the northern port city of Dunkirk, insisting Paris is going ahead with preparations should the UK crash out of the EU without a deal.
If there were an exit without an agreement, we would have to restore control formalities on goods, passengers to and from the United Kingdom, and we would have to equip our ports and the Channel Tunnel.
And Edouard Philippe's a man who knows what he's talking about. He's the former mayor of the port city of Le Havre.
Indeed, yes. I mean, an absolutely huge amount of trade between Europe and the UK goes across the English Channel, of course. I think the Dover-Calais route accounts for about 17% of the UK's trade, in fact. Edouard Philippe, yeah, he's saying, quite frankly, the prospect of Britain crashing out without a deal is very much still on the table. I would be interested to know, actually, what our two other panellists make of that, you know, if they think this is pure politicking, or three other panellists indeed, if they think this is just politicking, or if it is a reality. The French genuinely worried about this.
No, we just passed last week legislation to allow the government to be able to legislate quickly in case of a no deal. So we're preparing for it. But indeed, we have the ideal, you know, on one side, and the practicalities on the other side.
Yeah, because what happens to the UK citizens living in France? What happens to French citizens living in Britain?
It's not just goods; it's people as well. People's lives are affected directly. You know, do you need a work permit? What about pensioners? What about student fees? And you know, everything will have to change, but it will be kind of a radical change. So I think, you know, we're maybe a little bit more pragmatic, but we need to be, because the question is very serious. It's not just aiming towards an ideal, it's putting in place an agreement that will work.
Chloe Wesley, earlier you told us you prefer no deal to the one that's currently on offer. What would you say to reassure your UK expats living in France and French citizens living in the UK?
Well, the UK government has already said that EU nationals in the UK will be allowed to stay. I don't understand what would stop the EU from making that same reassuring message. Perhaps they're using it as a negotiating chip. But I very much hope that these fears aren't stoked up unnecessarily. I think that this would be another thing that you would have to agree bilaterally in a separate agreement if Britain did leave without a trade agreement. But I think the ideal way to leave is with a trade agreement. But I'm realistic about the time it would take for a new leader to come in and to negotiate that. I think one of the big mistakes was triggering Article 50 very soon after Britain voted to leave. I think what should have happened would been Britain negotiating for a no deal, so making those agreements just in case, and then negotiating a free trade agreement with that to fall back on. I think that would have been a much better approach.
All right, but going forward, Sajjad Karim, what can we say to reassure nationals on both sides of the channel?
One of the things actually that's quite frustrating about this whole episode is that many commentators are choosing to forget the realities in which we were dealing at the time. Right at the outset, it was made absolutely clear to the United Kingdom that there would be no talks and no negotiations until the point at which Article 50 had been triggered. Now, the very same people who were pushing for Article 50 to be triggered at that time are the ones today who are saying that maybe we should have prepared and negotiated far more before we triggered Article 50.
Well, who is that?
And when it comes to citizens, actually, they have been the biggest. They are going to be the group of people who will suffer the most because of the very premature way in which we as a United Kingdom rushed into this head-on very soon after the referendum without actually thinking through the full implications of exactly what was involved here. We allowed the politics to set the pace rather than the technical details of the exercise ahead of us that was required. But having said that, in fairness to the United Kingdom, we have given the assurances and guarantees as a government that EU citizens resident in the United Kingdom need. That hasn't been replicated from the European Union at this stage. There are, however, some complications because when it comes to issues of British citizens living in EU countries, they are living in a variety of different EU countries and on a variety of different EU bases. So their immigration exercise that needs to be carried out within the EU actually needs to be carried out in a number of member states on a number of variety of different bases. And that is why we still have some delay from the EU side on this.
Should that delay be lifted and maybe taken out of the negotiations, Hélène Conway-Mouret?
Well, I understand that it's one of the three main points, people's mobility within the EU, which is in the agreement, which today the hard Brexiters are denouncing as not being good. So I think it is an important point, because with trade and, customs and so on, this is, we need a deal and that can be worked out. But you can't play with people's lives. And what I know is that we already have 80,000 Europeans who have left the UK because they're very worried about their future there. As I said previously, with about 20% of the French community who are about 300,000 living in the UK, planning to come back. So, all these worries and uncertainties mess up people's lives and future. So I think it should be a priority to me.
Sajjad Karim, earlier we were talking about families being divided over this issue, the two main political parties being divided over this issue. What's it going to take to heal after all this process?
Well, I think everybody accepts that this has been by far the most divisive exercise that the United Kingdom has ever involved itself in, certainly in many, many years. And it's going to take a fundamental exercise to try and bring people back together. Now, one of the ways in which this could have been done was if, ultimately, people were willing to come together behind a particular deal. But I'm afraid ideology is still ruling the day so far as many people involved in this argument who are in a position of power and have voting strength are concerned.
Sorry, but from this side of the channel, Britain has always been known as this haven of moderation. Why is it that there's so much ideology now?
Well, I'm afraid when it comes to every other issue, we're a very pragmatic nation, but due to 40 years of a poisonous drip feed of anti-European unionism, mainly through our mainstream media, we find ourselves in a situation where, when it comes to this particular topic, big sections of our population are either completely misinformed or ignorant of the facts, and thereby actually hold beliefs that have no bearing in reality. And that is why they are not today open to hearing the actual situation as it exists, and that colours their view on the European Union and our relationship with it.
Chloe Wesley shaking her head. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for joining us from London. I want to thank Sajjad Karim for being with us from Manchester, Hélène Conway-Mouret, Catherine Nicholson. Speaking of media, stay with us. Media Watch is next. Let's start with those British papers. First, let's say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. Lots today. Certainly, sometimes the debate, I have to kind of dig a little bit on Twitter to find. Not today. There's lots and lots. There's an endless.
Everyone's got an opinion.
Endless mine of commentary. I'll start with the front pages. Well, there's going to be a whole new set of them very soon. But back May or sack May, that was Metro this morning, of course. The whole split aspect of UK politics right now, very much on the front pages. It's my deal or no Brexit. Was the Daily Express. You had the Mirror. Well, she actually gave a third option on that menu. It's my deal, no deal, or no Brexit, and got some people excited over probably a small prospect of no Brexit right now. War Cabinet is the front page of the Daily Mirror there. May Brexit plan a split cabinet, a split party and a split nation. That's just stating facts very plainly and not really taking sides. Inside the opinion pages of The Guardian, though, they have, they're certainly not sitting on the fence. The Brexit wreckers are slinking away from the rancid mess they've made. That's Raphael Behr, certainly not a fan of Dominic Raab, the Brexit minister, and others who resigned because they know Brexit is intrinsically dysfunctional. That's one opinion piece published a few hours back. Now, The Sun have changed their tune from this rather optimistic take on things prior to the Brexit vote, and today they've gone for a sort of a Sean Connery accent Brexit. But I think that's not what they're actually. I practice that to be able to say
it's a family show, so don't go there. Don't go
the Sean Connery accent, right? Okay, yeah. But we know there might be another reading of that as well. Right. And in fact, there is, might I say, something of a scatological theme to the cartoons as well. And this is I think is it the Guard? No, it's the Independence cartoon. Brexit is served, and you can see there Arlene Foster in the background vomiting into a bowl.
I hope nobody's eating while you're
No, right, sorry. I'll move on quickly. But you can see there's a degree of disgust, really, with what's on the menu, generally speaking. This is the Telegraph again. Alistair Heath, Britain cannot accept this horrific, humiliating surrender to the EU. And this is really how it's viewed by the hard Brexiters, that the UK is remaining attached to a ball and chain to the EU. So that's really how it's viewed, and that no contract would ever be signed in this way. This is leaving us in the control of a hostile power, etc. What else do we have? That's the front page of the Daily Telegraph, and they've interviewed Nick Timothy, right, who was the former Chief of Staff of Theresa May, and this is his quote right on top of the front page. It's a capitulation the Commission knows it has won, hands down. They also have a resignation watch, which sounds very dramatic, but I suppose it is a real prospect. We've seen that already, lots of resignations. And this is indeed Dominic Raab's resignation letter, which was put up on Twitter, and of course lots of comments afterwards, which were probably not all very friendly. Certainly James Dornan of the Scottish National Party saying, could you tell us exactly what your role as Brexit Minister consisted of, given your resignation over a deal which we'd have thought you were part of signing up to? Is it true your main role was making biscuits and cups of tea and all of that? There's also, have I got news for you, satirical. And this is Dominic Raab's, it accompanied the resignation letter. It was a comprehensive list of his accomplishments as a Brexit minister. So you can see, whether it be serious criticism or satire, there's a lot of...
Well, it's an open secret that most of the negotiating was happening directly from number 10.
Right, certainly he didn't, well, he wasn't happy with the final outcome. There's also Larry the Cat there, apparently, on that resignation watch list, the resident cat of number 10.
Larry the Cat's never leaving.
Right.
You know. He's got a great supply of mice in Downing Street.
He just survives all of the various switching chairs. Now, this got loads of shares online today. This was the BBC sign language interpreter trying to unpack Brexit. I'm not sure.
Pretty much how a lot of us felt.
Right, there you go. She really...
What's going on?
That's it. You have to, I suppose, really not just get the words across, but the feelings. That's, I suppose, what sign language is all about. Now, the French have a lovely expression, dialogue de sourds, where at cross purposes, like people...
Like deaf people speaking to
Right, people who don't...
Deaf people's conversation.
Exactly, and it basically means people being at cross purposes, which kind of sums up this next tweet, which is also the lyrics to a Spice Girls song.
That's right.
I don't know why you're looking at me, James Creedon, but yes, it is the Spice Girls.
You famously like the Spice Girls. And so here you have, I tell you what I want, what I really, really want. No, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Repeat for 28 months. So this is the sense of exasperation I think that some are feeling at that. This is a satirical count, Prince Charles. Theresa May, have you tried turning the UK off and on again? I thought that was kind of funny, but I suppose it isn't really. It's kind of a lot of dark humour.
All right.
Now, out of time?
We're out of time.
Okay, I can't hear anything today. Sure. This is the one sober tweet I'll finish with is Michel Barnier's, where you can see him looking somewhat steady there and confident in what has been achieved from the EU side, I suppose.
All right, a bit of gravitas from James Creedon to finish that segment. Many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.